I knew that Main Chance and then Highlands were farms, but I didn't know absolutely anything about how that part of the world worked. And when I dropped an email to Kevin Somerville, he had just started at Drockenstein, and I said to him, listen, I didn't know Racing Manager existed, but if you hear of any opportunities with any farms down there that are looking for a racing manager, I think that type of job is right up my alley.
Welcome to another edition of In the Box Seat podcast with myself, Warren Lenferner, still flying solo because Andrew Harrison, I've lost track of him. Where he is, I don't know. The last time he had signal was somewhere in the Kalahari, but that was 2 weeks ago. So where he is and when he's coming back, I don't know. But we don't need him again today because we've got a very special guest on what I must tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is the last podcast of 2024. But more about all that just now. Let me introduce our guest. The gentleman's name is Justin Vermaak. He is the executive racing and Bloodstock of Cape Racing, and he's down up in KwaZulu-Natal to spend a few days with us. And Justin, lovely to have you with us, and thank you.
No, good. I've seen many of these episodes, so it's good to be on one finally.
No, fantastic, lovely, and we try and as guests come in and out of the province, we lasso them and look forward to spending some time with them, as we are going to do now. You've been involved in this glorious sport of horse racing from a very young age. Take us right back to where it all started for you.
Yeah, Warren, it's a question you get asked quite often, and I must have been asked it a couple of hundred times in my life. It feels like it's very hard to nail down that starting point, but I always revert back to my father, who always had, it was I think IGN in those days on TV, and then Super Track, and I went through a whole bunch of reskins. And he was always an avid punter and better, not huge amounts of money, but he had it on television all day, every day. And I simply followed it as a sport. I was never really, and to this day I'm not a bettor, as I call them. I don't have a gambling account with any bookmaker or the tote or anything. I've never ever been bitten by the betting side of things, ever. That's why you drive a BMW, I drive a Tata. That must be the reason. I've seen your tipping, so I can believe it. But that never really fascinated me much. It's always been the sporting aspect that really interests me. So, from a young age, I remember just following the horses and following the jockey and trainer combinations, almost like I'm a big Liverpool fan. So Liverpool's my club in the football world. And then when I was a youngster learning how to read, Johnny G and Patrick Shaw was like and Bernard Cantor and all those great horses, Teal, Ingleside, Sovereign Seas, all those horses from the mid-90s. I grew up, following that side of things. And I remember when I think Teal, I remember avidly, was my favorite horse. And I remember the whole preparation he went through to win what was then the Rothmans July. Okay. And I remember him winning the Guineas and then the Daily News. And I knew that was the stepping stone and how the program and the pattern, what you'd call it now, worked. And I mean, he won the July in 95 and I was born in 88. So I was 7 years old. And I already knew how the pattern system worked, And a big reason for that would be Owen Heifer. So I like to, when I speak to Greg Bortz about this, I say it's come quite full circle because my father used to play cricket for Berringman Crusaders with Owen, and Devon and I are very similar age, and we played cricket together as well. And when I was 5 or 6, we always used to have the tennis social evenings at their house, I think every Thursday or every Tuesday, whatever it was. And he picked up on the fact that I was completely nuts about horse racing. And he gave me a subscription to the Sporting Post. So it used to arrive in the mailbox. I think the books for the weekend would arrive on the Wednesday, and then the books for the Wednesday would arrive on the Monday, sort of thing. Yeah. And I just used to study each page. I was 6, 7, 8 years old. So it was printed on my brain from a very young age. Sure. And then I sort of had a lot of very lucky steps along the way. Again, my father and my mother by chance met a gentleman by the name of John Fox at the Summerfelt Country Lodge, as it was back in the day. I think I must have been 13 years old. Sure. And my father befriended him and just said, listen, my son absolutely loves horse racing. He's only 13, but if you wouldn't mind taking him to the track during weekends and school holidays, he'd love to come along. So John, who lived up the road from us, I used to hear his bakkie chugging along at 4:30 in the morning, and they used to run to the road to jump in the car and then go to Summerfelt. 13, 14 years old, and that just opened the whole racing world to me. I had no idea that whole part of things existed. So that was fascinating.
At that point, just sorry to jump in and interrupt you. At that point, you must have wanted to sort of pinch yourself, because from a young kid, I mean, and this journey's unfolding, and now you're in a racing stable. You must have just thought you're in seventh heaven.
Yeah, it was crazy. But like, he had a horse called Stranger Beware at the time. He was running in the Gold Cup in these races, and like, to me, seeing the horses and the jockeys and the trainers, it took them out of the race card and in person. And that was quite something. Yeah. It's like going to kick a ball with Steven Gerrard for a few minutes on the pitch. You might be useless, but it's still quite an experience.
Yeah.
So that was quite something. And I managed to befriend a group of people at that age, maybe slightly after that. There were a lot of apprentices at that time coming out of the academy. MJ Bailefelt and Corne Orfer and Warren Kennedy, and we all lived in Hillcrest and got up to a whole lot of trouble. But that was really, we formed bonds with a lot of those people. And obviously, as you get older, and a lot of people have moved abroad. Brandon Lorena's now in Australia. And you sort of grow apart a little bit as you get older. But those were great times in racing, and it was a really interesting way of growing up. But it was. I very quickly, again, had another lucky break. I got detached from John for a little while with family stuff that was going on at home. I couldn't get to Summerfelt for about 2 years or so. And right at the end of my tenure with John, bearing in mind I'm 16 years old about, a gentleman called Dylan Kuna rocked up at his yard, for lack of a better word, training horses under the lap, moving from PE until he could get his license. And Dylan had a chap called Alan Edery, who was a jock who was riding for him. And I took a gamble one day. I hadn't been to Summerfelt in 2 years. I opened the newspaper one day at school during my lunch break, and I saw a new trainer with runners, Dylan Kuna. And I thought, oh my goodness. In the interim, John had given up. And I thought, no, this has got to be my break back into racing. So I had my father drop me off at John's old yard. Must have been 4:30 in the morning. I haven't spoken to Dylan in 2 years. I rocked up there, and there was no Dylan to be found. I walked into the stable yard, and there was Duncan Howells. He had taken over. So in rocks this 16-year-old boy. Duncan must have thought, what on earth is going on here?
Was he still grumpy in those days?
Yeah, he was grumpy. He was grumpy at that time. He won't even remember this. But so I said to him, oh, sorry, apologies. I thought, do you know where Dylan Kuna trains from? He says, no. Dylan doesn't even train in Summerfelt. He trains at a private farm down. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my dad's dropped me off and gone. Here I am at 4:30 in the morning, sitting on my pat outside Duncan's yard. So I said, he said, but by the way, twice a week or whatever it was, he works on the turn. So I thought, okay, great, maybe he's there. So I walked from that yard across the bridge, past where Van Zyl rings now, all the way to the turn. And lo and behold, there was Dylan working that day. He said, I remember him seeing me. He was shocked. He thought, what on earth are you doing here, sort of thing. From that, I jumped onto the back of his car, went to his farm, and from that day, I don't think I ever left that place. So I did they looked after me like a second set of parents. Became like an adopted son. I'm sure I annoyed the living hell out of them. But I remember even doing my matric finals. Dylan was on honeymoon, and I was doing my finals, staying at the farm, training the horses. And the bug just bit me there. And then Dylan decided one morning, we're going to open up a satellite yard at the Vaal. I'm going to go and train the horses and run the yard there. He eventually moved up full time. And then going into that industry of what was Johannesburg racing that's where I cut my teeth. Got into the jockeys agency side of things and more back into form, which is what I was good at from the beginning.
What is the name of? Can you remember? He's the Summer Cup. Dylan won.
Yes, Strategic News.
That's it. Strategic News. Quite Glenn Schofield, was it?
Yes, correct. So that was an interesting one, because that I didn't know jockeys agents existed when I was 18. I went to Johannesburg, and Chad Little, funny enough, said to me, you know your form very. Johan Janssen van Vuren was Jeff Woodruff's assistant then, and he was Mark Khan's agent, and we used to talk horse racing. And Johan just said, geez, you'd make a good agent. You know every horse where it ran. You know your form backwards. And then Glenn Schofield phoned me and he said, I'm moving to Australia next month, but I want to come to Johannesburg and I want you to do my rides in Joburg for a month and we'll have some fun and then I'm off. So I said, cool, why not? I haven't the faintest idea what I'm doing, but we'll give it a bash. And then I remember his first meeting up, 4 winners, 3 winners the next meeting. I think the third meeting, he won the Victory Moon on a horse called Appellate Court.
Yes.
It was for Glenn Kotson. And we had Strategic News in the race, who we knew was, for us, he couldn't miss the Summer Cup, the way he was handicapped, how good he had become. But in that same race, Waishang Moeng had ridden him and his saddle slipped. And he ran one of the fastest 400 to finishers and Waishang was trying to not fall off. So Glenn came back to me and said, we've got our ride now in the Summer Cup because we hadn't had a ride, referring to Appellate Court because he just won the Victory Moon, which was obviously the big prep for the race. Yeah. And I said to him, I think we should hop off this one and ride Strategic News.
He must have thought,
he did. He said 100 to 1, but he said, you know what, you've done such a good job for me. I'm going to Australia next week. Do what you want, I don't care, but you tell Glenn Kotson. So next day we're scratching. So we had the added problem of not knowing if Strategic News was even going to get in the race. Yeah. Glenn committed to riding him, I think it was 53. He said ride it plus a half or so. So anyway, I have to tell Glenn. Glenn is raging. He remembers this because I wound him up about it often. And then he got, I think Bernard eventually rode Appellate Court. We committed Glenn onto Strategic News, and Dylan and I sat in the office at the Vaal going, I hope the horse gets a run. Final field comes out, horse gets a run. Thank goodness. Glenn Kotson next day in the newspaper, everyone wants to know why Glenn's not riding Appellate Court. It was one of the journos for the Citizen at the time that he spoke to, and he said, no, Glenn didn't make the decision. It was his young and naive agent who made the decision on his behalf.
They had to throw naive in,
didn't they? They had to have
it
big, you know. So as it happened, Strategic News won the Summer Cup, and the first person I bumped into on the way down was
a journalist.
Glenn Kotson.
Oh, Glenn Kotson.
So he shouted an expletive at me, but we all know what Glenn's like. He's all good for a laugh. So that was quite a big thing for me. And then the next month, Anthony Delpeche returned from Hong Kong. And after that whole stint, he asked me to do his rides, and I did his rides for 3 years. So that was great. Yeah,
what a story, Chef Justin. And of course, in between all that, you mentioned Matthew Lips, the Sporting Post winning form. I mean, the late Matthew Lips, what a great man in racing he was, and we miss him dearly. And he did some handicapping, sadly, before he passed away, and starping, but you also did a bit of handicapping, didn't you?
Yes, Matthew replaced me. When I left, they were looking for a new body.
Okay.
And Matthew came in after that. So that was, I was, I think, 20 years old at the time. Again, living in Johannesburg. I did it for about just over a year or so. And then it was one of the 2 key decisions I made in my life. The first one was just before that, when I decided I didn't want to go into training for lots of reasons. I just thought, I'm a very much a numbers, averages, statistics type of guy. And I just thought the amount of work that goes into that profession and the success rate is so small. I thought that's not for me. I'm going to go and do something with a bit more freedom and something that you can maneuver a little bit more with. So I went into the form side of things, did a stint as a jockey's agent, and then I got approached to become a handicapper. I think I replaced Ryan Skelton. He went to somewhere in the Middle East.
Yes.
Then after about a few months in, I knew this wasn't for me. I remember going to Turfentine one day and thinking, geez, I really don't want to go. And then I thought to myself, if I'm doing any job in racing and I don't want to go racing, it's probably not the right gig for me.
Yes.
So I pulled the plug on it. I phoned a few mates. I said, Brandon Lorena was one. I said, Brandon, look, I'm going to bolt, but I didn't have 2 bob in those days, so I needed a job. And I said, if I leave, can I do your rides? He said, no problem. So I left, started doing Brandon's rides. And about a week before I left Joburg, working out my notice period, Smunga Kumalo was phoning me nonstop. And I knew exactly what he wanted. so I didn't answer. I hid, bearing in mind Smunga at this time was getting injured every month.
Okay.
And he was 15th in the jockey's log 5 years in a row. He was bang average, like at best. And then the last night meeting I was there, he cornered me and he said, I know you're leaving, you have to do my rides. I said, Smunga, please, I'm not interested. With respect, let's stay mates. And then he badgered me. Eventually I said, fine, we'll give it 2 months. 2 months went, he got injured again. we clung on, and then we got the ride on a horse called Wagner in the Summer Cup. The race has been very good to me. At 52 kilos, I think, and he won the Summer Cup on Wagner. He then got in with Sean in those days, and he won the Presidents on Heavy Metal. And so he reeled off a few Group 1s, and his career started to fire. Then another big call came in the July that year. I think it was still the Vodacom Durban July. He had obviously won the Summer Cup on Wagner. Smunga, in his brilliance, had told Derek Bruchman that he was going to ride Wagner in the July. He obviously took that as a commitment. And Heavy Metal had just run a fantastic second in the Jubilee carrying top weight. And I still remember doing the Understarters Orders program for that July, and I was very big on Heavy Metal. Just the way he was going to the race, he was drawn well, that turn of foot he had, he was such a good horse, a very, very good horse that people don't remember. And I said to Smunga, there's no ways you riding Wagner over this. So we'll take the double booking, I'll take the fine, I don't care. You're going to win the July on this. I'll take the Derek didn't speak to me 6 months, Joe Sommer didn't speak to me for a year. I said, it's fine, I'll take it, this horse is going to run, this is going to win. This is the winning ride, I don't care if it's 25-1. So he takes the ride, we deal with all the blowback, and a week, then the Jubilee happens. And Sean wasn't very happy with the way Smunga rode the horse. You know, he was supposed to be, it was his prep in, and he got in, because he was such a good horse, he got involved in the finish, and Smunga gave him quite a hard ride. And it wasn't quite the perfect, nice, softy-ish run, if I can say that, into the big race. So I think he ended up getting another kilo penalty from it. So of course, Sean, being the perfectionist of placing, was absolutely livid. And in the build-up, so he puts him on the horse anyway. Long story short, in the build-up to the race, Pomodoro starts to get a bit iffy with his bloods and a bit virusy, and Striker was riding him. And Sean said, no, look, if I take Pomodoro out, I'm going to pop Striker onto Heavy Metal. So I'm sitting
you fainted.
Thinking, I'm about to die. I think Pomodoro is all right and has a miraculous recovery. Anyway, so he does, and then Smunga rides the horse, and then that was that. And then he had all that momentum with him, and he won the championship the next year. I was his agent for 3 years or so, and then it came to an end, and I started with Main Chance, and then that's where my move into the whole Bloodstock world started.
We'll come back to the Bloodstock and back to horses. I just want to sandwich in between. Tell us about your family. Young, gorgeous family. Tell us more.
Yes, so my wife Danielle is 4 years younger than me. We met, it'll be 7 years in January that we've been together. Okay. So again, I think I've had 4 or 5 big top 2 decisions in my life so far, but I suppose on a personal level compared to career, I met her, I was just about to turn 30, and at a bit of a crossroads. I'd only had 2 partners before that, one which you could barely count, being young. Another woman that I was quite serious with, and then made a bit of a selfish decision for the first time in my life and decided that it was not quite perfect, and I knew if I'd waited a little bit that there'd be something that I would think would be better for what I was looking for from a wife going forward. And I met her, and it was obvious from the very beginning, without sounding like a Richard Gere movie, but I knew from the start, and I think she knew as well. We moved in together 6 months in, started at a 1-bedroom apartment in Greenpoint. I was, I think, year 2 of Green Street Bloodstock, still with Main Chance as well. And yeah, it was testing time, it's a young couple, and I mean, we weren't swerving by any stretch of the imagination, but started out small, and now we're not so small. But we obviously have a child now. Jean-Luc has turned 4 in October.
Sure.
It was, we made the decision to move out to Paarl, where we live now, about 1.5 years into our relationship, and month 1 of moving into our house, which we purchased, our first home, Danielle fell pregnant, and COVID struck 2 months later. So it was one of those.
Graciously.
So we spent the first 6 to 8 months, I think, in COVID, in lockdown. We live in Valdevie Estate, which was quite open, and we were allowed to walk around and go to the deli and shit to buy clothes, which was, food, which was cool. Gave you a little bit of a break, because people forget with short memories how painful that long stretch of lockdown was. It was fun times. We've traveled the world, which has been great. I've taken her to Argentina and Singapore and Dubai for work and all that sort of thing. And Jean-Luc has been, I always knew I was going to enjoy fatherhood, but it's been even more than I expected. It's changed my whole, as every father, I suppose, worth their salt says, it changes your whole perspective on life. You take things a little bit easier on the other stuff, because it gives you a perspective on what's important and what's not really that important.
Sure.
So, we've been through a lot. I mean, we moved to Dubai in 2020, sold our house, and I'll never forget, it was a Friday. We just dropped our cars off at the dealer. We were moving to Hamburg to live in Germany, and I was going to do Bloodstock based at Andreas's farm, Fairhof, in just outside Bremen, and work the European Bloodstock scene there, and then do winter in Dubai during the carnival.
Okay.
And we were going to do that swallow thing, 6 months, and it was going very well when we were there. But again, try to keep my long story short. We're sitting on a Friday, boxes in the house, cars dropped off, watching Sky News, and a new variant is discovered, which later became Omicron. Okay. And I sat and watched every country block South Africa one by one. we were flying to Hamburg on Monday, visas, tickets, everything, moving out the house Saturday, with the in-laws Sunday, flying Monday, and on Friday, bang, closed. Sure. So we were stuck again, and we stayed at a mate's house who was living abroad, and it was empty. We stayed there for 6 months, and then when the gates opened, we went straight to the UAE.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's been a testing time for a marriage, a young marriage, especially with a 4-year-old.
4-year-old, yeah.
But it's been good. Yeah, things are great.
You mentioned Green Street Bloodstock. You mentioned, of course, Main Chance, and I remember that lovely tour you took us on many years ago. I'm sure you remember, to see a couple of stud farms with you down in the Cape, and being a bloodstock agent for various people, including Lawrence Werner's and Green Street Bloodstock, and that's also, I mean, we could sit for 2 hours and talk about that, but I just want to particularly talk about Green Street, and because that took you on a roller coaster ride of note. That
was something out of left field, because I started at Main Chance, I think 25, and that's when I relocated to Cape Town. And I mean, even in my early 20s, and having been a jockey's agent and an assistant trainer and a handicapper, like, to me the Silvano out of Carry On Alice was, I didn't really understand what it was. I knew it was a stallion, and I knew that Main Chance and then Highlands were farms, but I didn't know absolutely anything about how that part of the world worked. And when I dropped an email to Kevin Somerville, he had just started at Trockenstein, and I said to him, listen, I didn't know Racing Manager existed, but if you hear of any opportunities with any farms down there that are looking for a racing manager, I think that type of job is right up my alley. And he said, funny enough, I think Main Chance are looking for one. I'll forward your CV, send it to me. So I sent it to Kevin, he sent it to Dr. Jacobs, and then they phoned me for an interview. And then it came down to 2 or 3 of us, and I flew back for a second time. I sat with John Slade and just about passed that interview, which is not an easy one, and then met Andreas at the One and Only, and then a week later got the mail saying, we'd like you to move to Cape Town and come do this job. Sure. So, oh my goodness, okay. So off I go, haven't the faintest idea what a second dam or a third dam is, or nothing, absolutely. I just know horse racing. And luckily, because I got a pretty good memory from memorizing form and that sort of thing, it just all clicked very naturally. And then I managed, when I had done the job for long enough and started to learn the people, bearing in mind I've just moved there, I'm a manager at a farm, I don't even know who Pippa Mickelbro is, and she is an intimidating person if you don't know her, so I'm like this young guy in this big world of people. This was the heyday of Mayfair, like it was the money, and Coolmo here, and Joosta was spending huge money, and Chris van Niekerk. It was a monstrous industry there. Yes. And it was daunting, and I learned the hard way with a few mess ups along the way. And being a couple years in, I thought, oh, I started traveling, and I said, geez, there's a massive gap for syndication in this country. They're doing it so well everywhere except here. Of course, people had done it in stages here, but it hadn't been done in that modern commercial way yet. I remember speaking to Robin Bruss about it, who had, I think, Delta syndicates back, and they were doing things by fax machine. So like, we stepped in, I thought, here's a gap, let's give this a go. I don't know if we're going to make money, I don't know if we're going to have a winner, but let's give it a bash. Okay. So I rock up at March Book 2 sale and bought some absolute cheapie. I think she was 50 grand by Warm White Knight, called Miss Nightingale. Had not a buyer in sight. I roped in one of my closest friends, Carl Johnson, who I went to school with, who unfortunately passed away recently. First client of Green Street, my mate.
Sure.
And then that year, I went to the World Cup in Brazil, at Rio de Janeiro. And I met a guy called Anthony Day Toombs, who ended up being the best man at my wedding. He's a Durbanite. We met on the Copacabana in the same tour, just randomly. And I roped him and his mate into shares, and I owned the rest. And Gavin van Zyl was my trainer, and he helped me out by not charging me training fees for a year on the horse, just so I could get it together. You know, and then years later, once it had changed, everyone says, oh, why you got 50 horses with Gavin, why?
That's why.
Hello.
You know, yes.
And that's why, and that's not why, but Gavin and I become very close over the years. During
basically, he was prepared to help you.
He mentored me all the way through.
Absolutely.
And he had just done Team G and all those little syndicates. So, and the Van Zyl family it's a great family. Chesney and I were great mates. He still are. He's in Australia now, obviously. So, try and keep it short again. We ended up with about 80 different horses racing, expanded into Singapore. We had more than 100 winners. We won group races. And I remember when I'd made the decision it got too big. That was my mistake with Green Street. It got huge. It became unmanageable. I had to hire a lot of staff and the expenses that come with it. And you know what the ownership game is like. So it did all right. Financially, it didn't knock it out the park. And I got to a point in my life where I needed to start making money. So it was probably, I would still say, the single greatest success of my life was Green Street, because afterwards, a lot of other little entities came out to do the same thing, which was awesome. I always said, I wish there were 50 of us. I never saw it in a competitive way at all. But what you did see was how hard it was to achieve success, because everyone started dropping out after a few months. And to this day, there's not really, Green Street hasn't been replaced. Really, there's a few guys that are doing well with 5 or 6 horses. We had 80, and we were running in Group 1s, you know. To do that was starting with buying 20 and 50 grand horses. It was a monstrous achievement. Like I'm very, very proud of what we did. I'm happy we closed it when we did. I moved on to my Vermaak equine, what I called my own business when I was self-employed, and I moved on to bigger clients, Lawrence Werners, etc. Who's played an unbelievable role in my life. But what Green Street did was put me in the shop window to show people that I could buy horses. And I needed that, because in the beginning, when I was buying horses for Green Street, I hadn't the faintest idea what I was doing. I didn't know confirmation. I didn't know how pedigrees worked. Not that you're ever a genius, but when I think back to what I was buying, knowing what I know now, I cringe. I think, I'm wasted millions of rands of money, and a lot of it was my own. But that's the only way you learn buying horses. I keep, a couple of years, in the last few years, people have come and asked me, how do I become a big bloodstock agent? You know, like I was going towards before I took my job with Cape Racing. And I said, you got to go and buy horses. You got to lose money. You got to spend money. You got to buy shockers, and then you learn. And it's trial and error, and you build it up to becoming. And then if you're honest, that helps as well. It was fantastic. I mean, Green Street was, those were great years.
Justin, your selection of yearlings, without giving away secrets, but I mean, what is it that you look for, at a yearling or a horse? If there's horses for sale that are in training, whatever. What do you look for in a horse, especially a yearling?
I think buying yearlings is probably the world's biggest mugs game, especially in racing. It is buying yearlings. You can get the numbers in your favor. So when you're buying yearlings, you're starting at stock, which is totally unexposed, right? 3% of horses win stakes races, and that's what you're trying to buy. So you're coming over here at the bottom of the triangle. Look, if you're buying 3 out of 100 stakes winners, then you're achieving the breed average. So if you're buying 6 or 7 stakes winners out of 100 buys, you're doing well.
Yeah.
That's pretty poor odds. By far and away the best way to buy good horses, and was what I concentrate on, is horses in training. They've been the greatest success stories of Lawrence's career and of mine, is buying horses in training. One of the greatest bloodstock agents and syndicators ever to live, Barry Irwin, built his business buying horses in training. Because you're skipping all the messy bits. You're jumping in right over there. And worst case scenario, you buy a horse who ends up average or only wins a listed race. But when you're buying yearlings, you buy 80 horses before you buy a listed winner, no matter how much you spend.
Yeah.
So buying yearlings is very difficult. There's things you can do to get the numbers in your favor, catch more fish in that net, of which I'm not stallion crazy. A lot of people will only buy horses by Gimme and Vercingetrix. I'll buy a horse by any stallion. As long as I like mares that could run. So if a mare could run and it's one of her earlier foals, like the first, second, third or fourth foal, that's my game. As long as the stallion can produce a runner, then I go for it. And then it's about value, obviously.
Yes, yeah.
Confirmation is a tricky thing. I went through a spell about 3-4 years ago where I would not buy a horse unless it was completely clean-legged and it had a perfect hind leg. And then I missed bucket loads of good ones.
Yeah.
I bought that horse Thumbs Up in training for Lawrence. She won a group race. And then her brother Bakirari came on the sale and had offset knees like this. And I said, no, not me. That ended up being at my command.
Sure.
So but then there's a lot that are offset or have bad legs or back at the knee,
yes.
and you never see them.
Sure,
So
sure.
it's a bit of hit and miss, but I've learned after speaking again to people who know a lot more than me, Vaughan Marshall, who's probably the best yearling buyer around. I consider him and Sean Terry, with a shout out to Glenn Kotson and Gavin Funzel, as fantastic horse buyers.
Yes.
Sean is particularly good, and one thing you'll see about Sean is he'll buy horses, he buys an athlete.
Sure. And he succeeds. I mean,
Yeah.
Skizzles,
Exactly.
he's got across
So
the board.
You
absolutely.
could see there was one very good horse by Gray's Inn. It was Legal Eagle. Sean trained it. There was one very good horse by Right Approach, White Line Fever. Sean trained it. So there was a period where a couple of years ago there were arbitrary good horses, should I say good horses by arbitrary stallion.
Yes.
And more often than not he trained them. That's because he doesn't nail himself down to say, I'm only going to buy these stallions.
Yes, yeah.
And if you do that, you miss Dave the King, who's by Global View. You miss Katak, who's by Patala Palace. There's so many very good horses by a stallion who threw one good one or whatever. But you can't limit yourself that way. Otherwise, you just end up buying a lot of expensive duds.
Yeah.
That's what happens. So I look for an athlete, a horse that walks well. I'm a bit more forgiving on confirmation, but not to the point where it's ridiculous. And I'm quite forgiving on who the stallion is. That's pretty much how we go now.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. And talking of sales, now would be the right time then to talk about Cape sales. I mean, Cape Racing, Cape Sales. You're involved with both, and there actually is a sale coming up now towards the end of January. These catalogues are out, and the catalogues are available in KZN as well all over the country. Cape Racing, Cape Sales rather. Incentives, efficient, fantastic.
Yeah, we're getting there. It's been a long road, not long necessarily in time, but in effort, because we started out as a fledgling business, and obviously we've got a competitor who's, I would call a friendly competitor, but a competitor with a sales venue and decades of history of selling horses. So we come along like these new boys. Let us sell your horses. It's not that easy. You've sort of got to prove it first. So we've had a couple auctions. I think we've done well enough that the vendors have now started to support us on a higher scale. That will be seen in no uncertain terms when you open up our March catalogue and our January catalogue. So last season we had about 300, last sales season, so the January sale this year, the one we've hosted already. We had about 300 entries, and we had to nail it down to 130 horses because we are venue constraint at the convention centre.
Okay.
We made the decision to make Hollywood Bets Kenilworth the home of our sales business. So that is where we will be selling horses from now until we close our doors. Unfortunately, our sales venue that is being built will only be ready for the 2026 auctions. So next year, temporary stables, saddling boxes, we're making it fantastic. but it's a temporary setup.
Okay.
Despite that, our stalwart vendors have supported us in massive numbers.
Sure.
We therefore decided during our entry process that we are going to now split our premiers into 2 auctions.
Okay.
We've got our January auction where Greg and I were umming and ahhing, do we do this sale? Because the biggest negative from the vendors was it's too early for our horses.
Okay.
And amongst a rapidly reducing foal crop, when you've just got less horses to sell and only forward horses can make a January sale, you're getting even less forward horses to sell. So naturally, the group of horses that can be sold that early is getting smaller and smaller. So
sure.
You're swimming upstream. So we decided then the convention centre sale this year was an unbelievable success. And I say this with respect to the horses that were being sold. I know the mare on every single stud farm in this country. I go to every sale and I see all their mares. The horses that have been coming to Cape Racing sales auctions have been the second string from breeders that have been going to, for example, nationals in April.
Okay.
Bar the odd breeder here and there, and bar the odd horse here and there. But to summarize it perfectly, if you went and shortlisted horses for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which I did for 2 years, if you went to the January sale Cape Racing, you'd come up with a shortlist of 2. If you went to nationals, you'd have a shortlist of 20.
Yeah.
So no one can argue with me against the quality, where the quality was being sent.
Sure.
So now people compare numbers. They say, oh, but at nationals we get 30 grand a horse more than we did in January. So, but hold on a second. At nationals in April, you're selling 8 out of 10 of your blue chips, and you're giving us 2, and then you're comparing let's compare apples with apples. Send some proper horses and let's see what you get. So then we had examples like Susan Rowett, who's been a fantastic supporter and a great help of ours. She sent a standout colt to our first auction. Thank you very much. You will get money for this horse. It's a no-brainer. He's a Karari. Kararis don't necessarily sell for millions of rand. They got 2 million rand for that horse. It's called Handsome Prince. Last year, Lawrence Werner's got 1 million rand for an Erupt. So, and the Hong Kong Jockey Club bought a horse, a gimme for 3.4, 3.6, who went to Hong Kong. And we've slowly but surely won over the vendors that have actually seen, okay, hold on, you can get money if you bring the right horse. So there's been a movement amongst a lot of the Cape breeders to sell more horses in Cape Town because of mainly the troubles of transporting all these horses to Johannesburg. So you think about it logistically, the breeding industry has changed. There were a lot of breeders in Johannesburg, there were a lot of breeders in Natal, there were a lot of breeders in Cape Town. A neutral venue made sense. Sure. Now, you've got 80% of horses being bred in the Cape. They all move to be sold in another province, and then half of them come back anyway and have to jump through quarantine hurdles and vaccination issues and travel sickness and all these problems that come with it. I'm not saying selling outside of Cape Town is not the way to go, but there most definitely has been room for growth to sell more in the Cape.
Sure.
And we saw that, like, as voters would vote for a party, the constituents voted with their feet, and we've seen vendors and breeders like the idea of selling in the Cape more, not entirely, but more, and that's grown our offering. So now we've got 95 select horses in January, which I've built into more of a forward, precocious 2-year-old type sale, where we can be a bit more forgiving on pedigree, but very strong on type. And then March sale, which has got all the pedigrees, the outstanding horses. And when we see that March sale come out, that book, it'll send shockwaves through the bloodstock industry, because it's going to be a power sale.
Okay, sure. Well, that's exciting, because the first sale of 2025 is is the Cape summer sale. And as I said, that catalogue is out in circulation already.
Warren, if I may just say as well, just to close on that, because you touched on it and I ignored it, the incentives and all that from
Yes.
So the whole idea, and I've copied this one. Well, you don't have to be a genius. In South Africa, we're 10 years behind. So all you have to do is look in the first world and see what worked and copy what did, and not copy what didn't work. So Magic Millions have a sales and racing festival, which works like a charm. At the end of that big January sale they have there. So the idea with March was to create the super cash rich race day. Up comes the big cap slot race, 5 million. The slipper for 2-year-olds, 3 million. And then the 1 million, 1,200 and 1 million mile for when they're 3-year-olds. So we extended our racing festival from 7 to 8 meetings, extended it to mid-March, because the weather in Cape Town mid-March is still phenomenal. And we've been sitting there in March thinking, flip, we've ended our season. What a pity, because we could be going right through.
Yes.
So we've extended it into March with this final Cape Racing Sales Festival Day, put those huge money races on, and made them open to all of our graduates. So now we're trying to bring the whole of the country to Cape Town in the middle of March to go racing at the big race day and to go to the sale that happens in the few days leading up to it.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of exciting things. That's certainly for sure. The job that you hold is a stressful one, but you always manage to find time to have a bit of a chirp, and you listen on the TV and on various platforms amongst your friends and your work colleagues. You've got a good sense of humour. I suppose you have to have.
Well, you definitely have to have. I mean, if you look at the people I work with, you got Alistair Cohen and MJ Baileyfeld. If you don't have a sense of humour with them, then you're in trouble. So, no, I think people in racing generally have a good sense of humour. Yes. I mean, this is such a shocking game. You have to. The lows are so low and so often, and the highs are so far and few between, that if you don't have a sense of humour, it's going to be a long, suffering road. So I think that's why you get those super sour people in racing, of which there are some. I don't have to name them. They don't have a sense of humour that survived them through the decades. And then you get the Paul Laffertys and the other ones that have survived with a smile on their face because they can make a joke of everything. So I think it's important. I sometimes have to not take it too far, otherwise HR has me in for being the clown, So.
Justin, but then you get a difficult person. I mean, that's we all have a sense of humour, a laugh, but when you deal with whether it's a punter, whether it's a member of the public, whether it's a trainer, whether it's whoever it may be, in life we come across difficult people. How do you take that in your stride? Because whenever you look at you, and I said it to Kevin Shea, who sat in that very same seat the other day, every time you looked at Kevin Shea, he looked like he had, and he did have everything under control. He looked good. He looked under control. Same as you. Whenever you see you, yes, you could get flustered, but how do you handle an agitated human being, whether it's trainer or whoever it may be? Because you always look to be cool and calm.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, you learn. I get agitated, so I have to pay attention to that side of things, where some people take it easier. But I put a lot of effort into it. But I don't mistake the anger and the questioning. It's coming from a passionate place with most people. So whether it's a trainer, I always joke, I deal with trainers, owners, and breeders, and jockeys. There ain't nobody in racing who's dealing with all four on a daily basis. And it is hard, because if you think traders are bad, wait till you deal with breeders, and then jockeys, and I mean, they all have their own special issues to deal with. But I think what's important, and I say this with the greatest amount of respect, is that yes, you've got to be a certain way. You listen, and you, especially when you've been wrong, which happens a lot in racing, and you change and you pivot and you do what you have to do. But I think you also have to be quite firm. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with Lawrence Werners or a stable employee. You've got to be quite firm with that person. So if Lawrence wants to phone me and complain about something and I think he's wrong, I'll say, okay, I get it, but I think you're wrong, and this is why. And I think if you're soft in a way, then the people will bulldoze right over you. And that goes for a lot of trainers. I mean, you've got some trainers who will phone you all day and all night. And at some point I say, listen, I'm very happy to take the queries, whether on the program, whatever the story is, but it's getting to the point now where this is ridiculous. I'm not hiring a secretary to deal with your calls, and I've got 100 other things to do. So you've got to be, you've got to be respectful all the time with everybody, which I try and be, because everybody you're dealing with is very talented in their own right, whether it's a trainer, jockey, or breeder. They've made it, they're still standing for a reason. It's also their livelihood, which you've got to understand. So if a trainer's moaning because he thinks something about this certain race not being offered, he's worried about losing his horse, it's affecting his bottom line. And the same goes for breeders at sales. They're wanting to get the most for the horses they're selling. So you've got to deal with things delicately but also firmly at the right time, which is a hard balance. But you learn.
Yeah, but I suppose it's the right approach. I mean, and it's clearly working. We're all human beings. We all get a little hot under the collar. We're all human beings. But the balance that you've chosen certainly is working. Well, it's there for all to see. But In the closing stages of our conversation, because wow, we could sit and go for another 3 hours, and how nice it would be. But night racing, we record. I've told the public we normally record on a Thursday, but when we've got guests in town, we alter this the whole agenda. And tonight there is racing at Hollywood Beds Gravel, but by the time you see this, that would have come and gone. So just two more things to talk about in the home straight. Do you ever get a chance to relax? And if so, what do you do to relax?
Yes, I would say so, but not that much. I don't have hobbies per se. Okay. As I said, I live in Paarl, so it's quite far to Hollywood Beds Kenilworth. I don't go in every day, but at least 3 or 4 times a week, including Saturday. Okay. And that means I'm up at 4:30 to get on the road at 5 to miss the traffic. Otherwise, it's an hour and a half journey. Okay. So I'll get in the office at 5:15, it's dark, nobody's there, and then I'll do my good few hours. I try and leave before traffic, and then you've got a 4-year-old and a wife. So that, and then you're keeping a tabs on racing wherever it is. So that's quite tricky. After my son goes to bed, I normally try and catch up on what's happening in the racing world, in the Bloodstock world, what's happened in this sale and in this race here and that race there. And I'd say probably for enjoyment, I love my football, so we've got a 5-a-side mob in the estate where I live, okay. And that's probably the only thing I do that's not racing related. I don't drink, I like food too much, I suppose, like we all do. But the great thing about Cape Town is the restaurants, and we live in the winelands, so the farms, and I mean it's unbelievable. There's nowhere in the world like it. So
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, it is a special part of the world, really. And so you don't consume alcohol, a glass of wine?
No, I used to too much, okay. Like everyone. But not for, I'd say this will be in the 3rd year now of no alcohol. Okay. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have one of those pina coladas while on the beach in Mauritius once or twice. That's about my chop, yeah.
Let's talk a bit about, in the closing part of the podcast now, and people say a lot of us in the industry are going on about it a lot, and we're going to keep going on about it because it's certainly justified. We've seen the changes in the Cape. We know what's going on in the Cape. We know what's still to come in the Cape. And of course, that's now going to come to KZN. Greg Bortz, Owen Heffer, Hollywood, Cape Racing. Wow. I don't know what else to say. Wow.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. I mean, I was, like I said to you, we were living in Dubai, and then my plan was to come back in April for Nationals to buy horses for Lawrence, because I was a Bloodstock agent. And in that month, Greg came to me and said, I'm working on something. I'm going to do it if you're going to be my racing executive. So I sort of sat back, and my son was a year and a half, and we were like, do we come back? And we eventually decided to come back because of the picture Greg was painting. But, and I think he would say this, he didn't think it was going to become all this at the time. There was no sales company when we were speaking. I was going to be head of Cape Town Racing. You know, that was I could deal with this. Then got the sales company lumped in, the quarantine station, all these other things started happening, which all got joined up. And then obviously in the last bit of time, the whole Durban thing has started to now gain legs. And it makes absolute sense from a business and industry perspective, having the two regions working together under one banner. The key, Cape Town and Durban has very different set of issues. So when we went into Cape Town, we were racing for 55,000 Rand a race. People in Cape Town forget this. Very short memories. They moan about wearing a trainer's badge, but they forget that 2 years ago we were racing for 55 grand. Wear your trainer's badge. So it was a case of low horse population, bleeding to PE and Johannesburg and Durban, and trainers not running their horses. So what did we do? We pumped up the prize money, we paid people to run their horses, and it worked. And there was no lower division races for horses. So we started all these, what I call class 5s, what they're known as, and they're going to be known as here soon as well. They didn't exist in Cape Town. 2 years later, we're splitting them. Like, we're putting on a fillies class 5 and a colts one on the same day over 1,200, where before you'd do one over 1,200 and get 4 runners.
Yes.
So we completely changed the game there. I mean, it ain't sexy, but we threw on a lot of bad racing for bad horses, which is what we were missing. Here, it's slightly different. Here, there's a lot of poorer horses rating-wise, the top of the triangle is missing. So when you put on a pinnacle, like 112 to 96 race, not the long version that is here, you get your field size under pressure. But at the bottom, there's lots of horses.
Sure.
It was the other way around there. So, and I don't really think here you can get horses running more often than they are. They run quite often here. In Cape Town, a trainer was always one bad run away from an owner saying, oh, send that one to PE. So they kept them in the stables. I mean, I have this admitted to me. So here, different set of circumstances. Again, the most important thing is getting a horse ownership up. Horse population drives everything. How do you increase the horse population? Prize money and incentives, that's coming. We've seen the brochure from the 1st of January. We did entries today. By now, the time this airs, the finals will be out. But the new world of prize money incentives is coming and is starting. That will address the economics of owning horses, which is completely skewed in the negative. It will always be negative, but let's try and get it to a manageable number.
Yeah.
That will drive investment into horses, into the region, which is what's happening in Cape Town, at a level never seen before, even during the heyday. And that will in turn grow the horse population. You then keep them in the system longer. We don't want them bleeding to weaker centres. And you've got a horse population which gets back to where it needs to be to host the right amount of race meetings. Obviously, there's too much racing going on at the moment, not just in Durban. And I'm talking for the horse populations of the respective areas.
Okay.
And that's why you're seeing 4 or 5 runner fields. These horse populations cannot sustain 3 times a week racing. We are not taking the viewpoint that we want to host, say, oh, we've hosted a race meeting and we've had 5, 6 runners a race. We'd rather not host the race meeting.
Okay.
We want competitive racing. We want big fields. So when you switch on Cape Town and Durban racing, it's recognizable. You're watching Hong Kong, you know you're watching Sha 10. There's a full field, it's competitive, jockeys are going a good pace. That's something we're going to have to work on. That comes with bigger fields, naturally. There's just obviously a lot of work to do on the ground. The Polytrack announcement is step 1. Refurbishment of the Polytrack, which is going to buy 3 years of premium racing surface again. Hopefully that brings trainers back to the Polytrack. Encouraging more participation from raiders. Bi-coastal race programming. Horses from Cape Town to Durban in the winter and from Durban to Cape Town in the summer. We've been sitting here in Durban with cancelled race meetings all of December because that's the rainy season. Let's rather have some of these guys go to Cape Town and race now in the weaker races we are providing.
Sure.
Cape Town, absolute nightmare 2 winters we've had. We couldn't host a race meeting in a month. A whole month we didn't race in Cape Town. Send the horses to Durban, or at least a big chunk of them, and we don't have that issue here, and we can put on more racing here and that.
Yes.
So there's lots of different things which we're going to look to do. We want to install pride into ownership again. So that means you're looking at those people in the parade ring. They're well dressed. You need your owner's badge. We want people to aspire to being a member and make it something to look up to.
Sure.
We want people to buy horses for this region. A lot of existing big owners have left Natal racing. Why? Prize money's bad. Quality of racing is not that great. We want to get it back to how it was when it was the capital, and you will see these big owner breeders starting to race horses here again and bringing back satellite yards of some of the bigger trainer yards. All these little things which we'll look to do in the next year, 2, 3 years when the time is right. And I've got no doubt, knowing the passion of the racing folk in this place, our syndication initiatives we start in Cape Town, rolling them out here, it's going to fly.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it certainly is exciting. So, although, as you say, when you came, you're going to be the racing executive, Cape Racing, and it's just snowballed and got bigger and bigger. And knowing you, and now that, as I said, KZN's under, you don't falter. You get stronger and you get more excited because that's what it's all about. I mean, the more racing, the more you can work into it, the more you can get it better. I mean, that's what you're living for, all of
No, absolutely, and it's there's no separation. It's from the bottom right up. And when we've got to, it wasn't a long time ago when Durban was literally the capital of racing. You think back to those days of, Charles Laird with a huge yard here, Dennis Dreyer, Mike de Kock, Terry's, all had yards here. You used to have those maidens at the old Clarewood where you could pick the Guineas winner coming out of them. Our Giant and Eye of the Tiger were winning maidens there at the back end of this winter. The racing was unbelievable. It's unrecognizable from what it is now. But again, when you got a low horse population and too much racing, it just dilutes the racing product and it weakens it. And we see that in Cape Town ourselves. When we have stretches of too many meetings or off season, then you get really weak results, weak racing, bad for betting, etc., etc. So the whole country is connected as a racing industry. It's too small to be not connected.
Correct, yeah.
So the natural connection that will come with Cape Town and Durban is going to pay dividends to both regions in its own ways. Geographically, they're completely separated, which is great. And then their seasons are different, so they complement each other in so many ways.
Yes, absolutely.
The big job is to put those little pieces together to fit, which is going to take a lot of work, and most importantly, a lot of buy-in from our trainers and our owners. A bit of patience in the beginning when you're working through the snags, but just buying into the bigger picture of where everyone's trying to get to.
Yes, sure.
And that's what's very important.
Sure. Do you have a selection, early selection? When I say early, before we blink, it'll be the big Met, the big race down in the Cape. Have you got a selection? Have you thought? A lot of people
don't say Oriental Charm, I'm probably in trouble.
Well, it looks to be. I mean, what a prep Oriental Charms, having. And
won a race too short for him, but I don't think one stripe will run. Okay. Even if he wins the Lormans King's Plate. I think if Snow Pilot runs very well in the Lormans King's Plate, I think he'll go for it, which is interesting. Very aggressive horse on speed. 2000's obviously a big question mark. Atticus Finch is coming down, Summer Cup winner.
Okay.
So do I have a selection? Yeah, I was quite big on the way Red Palace was going until her last run. So I would say I'd probably throw a completely ridiculous selection out there at the moment and say 8 on 18 would be for me. Because I think he's going to run in the Premier's Trophy and I think he'll win it. And then there's no ways Justin's not going to run in the
carriages
with the Premier's winner. Like you got to go. It's the natural. And 3-year-olds. I mean, I have friendly arguments with people about this all the time. 3-year-olds at that age, they're so well in against their older horses. 3-year-olds have such a great record in the Met. They have a fantastic record. If they don't win, they run second or third.
Sure.
And if you didn't win, doesn't mean you haven't run a great race.
Absolutely.
So, Susanna won it as a filly, Run For It ran a close third, Horse Chestnut won it, the horse Badger's Coast won it the after him. They hardly ever run, and when they do, and that applies for the Lormans King's Plate as well. When the 3-year-olds run, they're always in the mix. Yeah. So I'd say 8 on 18 for me. Yeah, he's a very scopy horse. Very, very classy horse.
Okay, well that's interesting. That's interesting to keep an eye on 8 on 18 in the lead up and of course in the big race at the end of January. But all that's left really for us, friends, is to thank Justin for his time and his just such an informative podcast. And as I said, we could go on for hours. But there'll be more podcasts once I think you come back to Durban, if we can do a part 2 or once things have started happening in KZN, let's do a part 2. But for now, it's appreciated. I know you're busy and I called you up and to try and get things to align, but it's been lovely to sit with you and to hear your story, especially how it all started for you, really.
No, thanks, Warren. It's been fantastic. We'll be here more often, a lot more often. And I think maybe pre-season, we've had a couple months of the new program being run and then building up into the new feature season. Maybe we can sit down and do something for the public again.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, that's it. Well then, if Justin will just allow me a few moments just to send our good wishes to all of our followers out there. This, as I said, is the last podcast that you will be seeing for 2024. And wow, when we sat in the office the other day and went back and looked at all the guests that we've had over the years, we really are proud of the production and of the guests that we've had on our podcast. And of course, you've heard from Justin down in the Cape. They've got the Holding the Reins podcast. Holding the Reins, is that what it's called?
Taking the
Reins podcast. Our podcast up here. It's just great information for you, the racing public, who we rely on so much. So from all of us, if you celebrate Christmas, happy holidays. And we'll be back next year, hopefully bigger and better on In the Box Seat podcast. You enjoy the All I Want for Christmas campaign that we've been putting out on our Gold Circle social media page, and you'll enjoy that as well. But from all of us, Andrew Harrison in his absence, myself, Warren Lenfurner, Justin Vermaak, up here with the whole team that's involved in this production. Happy Christmas, happy holidays, and we will see you as always in the number 1 box.